All right, folks. So, some of you might have heard this, but there seems to be a war of words which has started between Governor Christie of New Jersey and Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky. This from the website race for the number 4 2016.com. According to quote, and I'm quoting Governor Christie here, quote, as a former prosecutor who was appointed by President George W. Bush on September 10th, 2001, I just want us to be really cautious because this strain of libertarianism that's going through both parties right now and making big headlines, I think, is a very dangerous thought. Now, asked if he meant Rand Paul, the senator from Kentucky, he said, "You can name any of one of them that's engaged in this." He said, I want them to come to New Jersey and sit across from the widows and orphans and have that conversation. I'm very nervous about the direction this is moving in." Senator Paul's office responded by saying, quote, defending America, and was from them to Politico. Defending America and fighting terrorism is the concern of all Americans, especially Senator Paul, but it can be and must be done in keeping with our Constitution while protecting the freedoms that make America exceptional. And also, Governor Scott Walker of Wisconsin said, I quote, I see a few loud and vocal people talking in Washington, and I don't think that necessarily reflects where the party is. That's what Governor Walker said of people like Rand Paul. So I think this means, first of all, this both means separate things for both the party, the Republican Party, and more importantly, the country. So what does it mean for the country? I think there's this debate as to if we should continue many of the policies that started under President George W. Bush with regards to surveillance, the Patriot Act, and our involvement overseas, versus kind of scaling back, repealing the Patriot Act, stopping all the surveillance, and kind of looking out more on the side of civil liberties, getting out of the Middle East, etc. So I want to outline what I believe is best for the country. I'm not as concerned about the Republican Party. I'll get to that later, but I'm more concerned about the country. So this is what I believe we should do. I think, first of all, that I completely reject the notion that the Patriot Act is unconstitutional because it's a false notion. It isn't true. The Patriot Act balances our civil liberties with our national security. What people often argue is that, well, it makes it easier to get a search warrant based on probable cause, but it's still a search warrant based on probable cause. It's not just, the only provision of the Patriot Act which doesn't have that is it does increase the availability to law enforcement to sneak and peek. But, I've got news for you. Sneak and peek happened before the Patriot Act. Some people may still reject it. That's fine. I understand your opposition to sneak and peek, but I don't understand the other provisions of the Patriot Act don't at all violate the Constitution. I don't even know if sneak and peek does in certain circumstances. One example of sneak and peek would be there's an exception to warrants with regards to what they could search that's in your car. That's one example in which I support sneak and peek. I don't support the police being able to just come into your house when you're not home without a warrant and searching around unless a door's open or if they can see, or if it's in plain sight. For instance, if you leave a fence, a gate unlocked, and they go in and they see something in your window that's suspicious, then I would understand that exception. So I see the Patriot Act, and look, the Heritage Foundation has looked at this, and they've said that the Patriot Act has stopped at least 39 terror plots since 2001. So I support the Patriot Act. I think it's crucial and I think law enforcement should have easier access to warrants. As long as they have the warrant, there's nothing that violates the Constitution in terms of being able to search with a warrant based on probable cause. Now, the warrant has to be constitutional, but as long as they get that constitutional warrant, they have a right to search your property. So I support the Patriot Act, and I think that I agree with the logic that it stopped 39 terror plots since 2001. That's number one. Number two, this NSA program. Phone tracing is necessary. Email tracing is necessary. The question is, can the NSA just, listen into your conversations without a warrant? The answer is absolutely not without probable cause, so they need a warrant. But as far as the program, as far as tracing where people's calls are going to, I don't really see a problem with that. Second of all, I don't see a problem with tracing your cell phone, because if you're out in public, you don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy. That's the whole thing here. So I support the NSA program. I don't agree with Rand Paul that it's unconstitutional. I really don't see how it is unconstitutional. Where I probably agree more with Rand Paul and libertarians is on the topic of foreign aid. I think some foreign aid is necessary when it comes to combating a humanitarian issue. Then I support foreign aid. But to simply hand out foreign aid to countries like Saudi Arabia and Egypt, the countries that don't like us or have evil regimes in power, I don't agree with that. And therefore, I do agree with Rand Paul. So that's one issue where I can agree with them, is on foreign aid. I could also, I kind of identify with both sides, the hawks and the anti-war folks, on intervention in general. I think there are instances when the United States has to intervene when it's in our national security interest. Occasionally, when when there are humanitarian interests at stake, I don't really like to intervene. When that happens, I think that there are other ways to deal with that. I think that our military should only be used to defend our country and our interest. But I think that sometimes there's this kind of hysteria on the side of many people like Rand Paul, who simply believe that we should just never intervene no matter what, because the government is out to get everybody. And let me tell you, I'm a critic of big government, but I'm not a critic of our military. I'm not a critic of law enforcement people, not necessarily the top who are appointed by the president, but the non-political people. I'm not a critic of them. Look, we could have a whole other conversation. I want to drastically cut the size of government here at home, in terms of economics and for other reasons, our debt. That's for another video. So I'm sort of in the middle here on intervention. While I agree with Rand Paul and others that we should shut down many of our bases overseas, I disagree that we shouldn't have any presence in the Middle East. That's stupid. It doesn't protect our country. But I also disagree with the hawks now, and people like John McCain and others, Peter King, more Senator McCain, who are saying that we should intervene into Syria. That is a very dangerous prospect, because there might be a regime that we don't like in power. But don't kid yourself. The opposition is just as bad, if not worse, than the regime in power. Look, we tried last year, 2 years ago, I forget when it was, I think it was 2 years ago. President Obama said that Morsi in Egypt had to go and that we should replace him with there should be an election. Well, watch what you wish for, because then we got the Muslim Brotherhood, which is worse than Morsi. So I think that in terms of politics of other countries, I think we ought to caution ourselves before we get involved there. And certainly intervention in the countries that don't pose a threat to us, I think, is dumb. So I think that, possibly on Homeland Security, I side more with the hawks. On actual foreign policy, I'm probably sort of in the middle. I support some foreign aid, not all. Certainly, I don't support how we give out foreign aid right now. I support some intervention. I don't necessarily consider myself an interventionist or an isolationist. I think that every situation has to be judged on its own merit before we send troops into war. So I don't really fall into one of the camps, and I caution against falling into one of the camps on national security, either the hawks or the anti-war folks, because I think that national security is something that should be, one, above politics, and two, we need a comprehensive strategy to win the war on terror. But we also have to be willing to assess every situation as it is, not as a chain link. There's a chain link between in fighting terrorism, but in terms of fighting regimes, it's not as much of a chain link effect. Every regime is slightly different. Every country's politics is different. But let's focus on our interest and not get involved in the politics of other countries. We shouldn't expect. We don't like it when other countries get involved in our politics, and we should be upset. So let's not do that to anybody else. Now, this also has deep implications for the Republican Party going into both in general, and to the elections of 2016. Because what you sort of have is you have Governor Chris Christie, who pretty much is the leader of the moderate wing of the Republican Party nationally right now. Then you have Senator Rand Paul, who is sort of the libertarian leader of the party. And there seems to be a fighting between more the moderates and the libertarians, and the conservatives. It's sort of like a game of ping pong between the libertarians and the moderates, and the conservatives are just sitting there kind of like, kind of in the middle there. You have Governor Christie, who has now joined other moderate Republicans, most of whom are more moderate than him. People like Congressman Peter King, who is now considering a presidential run on the premise that national security won't be discussed in the 2016 campaign. You also have Senator John McCain. These kind of folks take a more hawkish stance. They're more moderate Republicans across the board, but on foreign policy, they're more what traditionally is in line with the Republican Party, at least for the past 30 years or so. Then you have Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky and Senator Mike Lee of Utah, and folks like them who are more libertarian. They want to repeal the Patriot Act, get rid of this NSA program, and sort of get out of the Middle East. So you have these two competing factions in the party. Then you have the conservative faction, which probably represents the majority of Republican voters, which, as far as I'm concerned, is now led by Congressman Paul Ryan of Wisconsin, the Republican nominee for vice president last year, who almost became the vice president, might run for president next time. So you kind of have this divide in the Republican Party. And then you have a couple folks, very few folks like me, who don't really fit into one of these camps, at least on foreign policy. I probably fit in with the libertarians socially, somewhere in between the conservatives and the libertarians when it comes to economic issues. But I certainly fall probably more towards the hawks on foreign policy. Definitely in homeland security policy, I fall with the hawks. So what are we going to do about this divide in the party? And I think that we have to leave it up to the voters. And this divide has kind of been building in the past two primary cycles nationally. Now we have the libertarians seem to be the most vocal group as far as at the grassroots level. They seem to be the most vocal in terms of their views: non-intervention, repeal the Patriot Act, return to what they believe to be constitutional principles. The moderates are less vocal. So this is what I think is going to happen as time goes on, is as a party we are going to have to decide which direction we're going to move in. The conservatives are also going to have to get into this fight. Now, Governor Scott Walker, by any reasonable standard, is a conservative. Obviously, he sides more with the moderate wing of the party, with the Christie wing of the party. So I think foreign policy might actually be the biggest divisive issue in the Republican primary 2016. And I say that because, in all seriousness, Governor Christie is probably he's with the conservatives on most fiscal issues. Look at what he's done here in New Jersey. He's cut the size of government. He's reduced the amount of spending that government does here. He's held the line on taxes. I mean, this is somebody who is definitely with the conservatives on the economy. He's probably more with the libertarians even on social issues. He believes in states' rights. He has his own personal views, but he believes in the rights of states on several issues. But of course, obviously, what makes him a moderate probably is a stance on gun control, a stance on offshore drilling, a stance on immigration. These kind of move him towards the center, which is why I say he's really the leader of the moderate wing of the party today, though he's obviously more of a fiscal conservative. So, we're going to have to decide as a party which way to go in. I would caution against going the libertarian direction on foreign policy. I would caution that we should move towards the hawkish, moderate wing and conservatives. Because, listen, I still think about conservatives and moderates. I think on what I think divides the moderate wing of the Republican Party and the conservative wing is more on social issues. I think on foreign policy, they're more in solidarity, more hawkish than the Democrats. The libertarians are more like the Democrats on foreign policy. So, I think the party's going to have to decide which direction to go in. And that's done by the voters. That's not done by the politicians. Congressman Ryan representing the conservatives, Governor Christie and Congressman King representing the moderates, Senator Paul representing the libertarians. The four of them can't just sit down at a table. They're not going to be able to hash out the differences they have on foreign policy and which direction the national party should go. And it's going to be up to the voters. And I can tell you that in the last two cycles, it seems that the voters, at least on foreign policy, look, the Republicans nominated moderates in both 2008 and 2012, but both of them were pretty conservative or stood with conservatives and moderates. Like I said, more of the Republican than libertarian view, more hawkish on foreign policy, especially John McCain, though I'd argue McCain's actually become more hawkish since the 2008 election and maybe has moved out of the mainstream of the Republican Party even. Romney represented more the mainstream of the Republican Party, I think, on foreign policy than McCain does now. So, obviously, if I were to say who is winning this debate between the hawks and the anti-war folks in the Republican Party, based on the popularity of the hawks' policies and also how many of them there are and who wins elections. I said the foreign policy hawks are really crushing the anti-war wing of the Republican Party, which is quite small, but it's still growing. And I'm sure that people that are watching this that support Rand Paul, supported Ron Paul's 2 presidential bids, are saying, yeah, we're growing. We're going to become a majority in 2016. That remains to be seen. If Rand Paul wins the Republican nomination for president, that means, yes, the anti-war wing of the Republican Party won the debate. But in the past 2 cycles, that has not happened. Ron Paul was in the election the past 2 cycles. He placed 4th in 2008 behind John McCain, Mike Huckabee, and Mitt Romney. Placed 4th behind Romney, Gingrich, and Santorum in 2012. So obviously, Paul did better in 2012 than he did in 2008, which shows us that the anti-war movement in the Republican Party, the libertarian foreign policy movement in the Republican Party is growing, but it is still not at a majority. So this is a debate that the party is going to have going forward.